Hello, everybody. Hey, John Fenn here again, Church Without Walls International, CWOWI.org. Wanted to give you an update on Chris. Some good news. Spent most of the afternoon on the phone with a couple of state officials who have some authority, and also leaders in Home of Hope there in Veneta. And I'm happy to say that we have defined, not only for me, but I hope for other parents who have adult children in a group home or facility, on what a quarantine tailor-made to their abilities and understanding could look like. You've got to understand that, first off, Chris is if you're just tuning into this, Chris is our oldest son. He'll be 41 years of age tomorrow. Mentally, he's about 4 years old because the umbilical cord was around his neck in a slip knot and cut off air. He was at a home for his first 24 years, and then after his little brothers went on to college, it was apparent that even with home care and stuff like that, there was just impossible for us to take care of him. So we placed him in a group home, which was the hardest decision in our lives, and then moved to be closer to him a little bit later. And so that's where we've been the last 16 years. He's been there the last 16 years. And since March, when they began the quarantine mandates and the different things like that, the isolation, the letter of the law that has prevailed has been when your child, in our case, our son Chris, comes back, he will be quarantined 14 days. Now that quarantine has been defined as all meals, all entertainment, bathroom, everything will be done in his room for 14 days, 24 hours a day. When you're a mental 4-year-old, how can you do that to someone? But that's been the definition. As late as the middle of November 13th, when I received a call that because we were in a store and Chris didn't have a mask on, which there was no mask mandate then in that particular store, nor in that city. But someone saw, so Chris had to be quarantined 14 days. We opted to have him at home for 14 days. And even when I would go to, for instance, I'll use a letter K, one of the group home residents along with Chris, 4 men, 4 women. But they had a new female resident come in, and that, I'll just call her K for identification purposes. She was 14 days in her old group home, and then once she got into the new group home, she was 14 days in Chris's group home, in her bedroom. Every time I would go to get Chris or to run an errand or something, how is Kay? How's the new one? Oh, she's in her room. Well, how's she doing? Well, okay, she's in quarantine. And so that whole thing of being closed up in the room and everything being done for 14 days, you can just imagine locking up a 4-year-old. So that's where we were when I got the call saying that the new state regulations coming down today said that any resident coming home after Christmas time with family is going to be quarantined 14 days. And I asked for what that meant, and that meant closed up in the room, isolated from everybody else, eating, drinking, games, play, sleep, bathroom, everything in the room. That was from my earlier video. Well, I've been on the phone with 2 state officials, CEO of Home of Hope, a couple of other officials there, and the state lady who's in charge of the surveying of Home of Hope and others, finally was able to define for me, the very first time anyone has defined for me, a practical application outside of the letter of the law. Everything we've heard since March has been the letter of the law coming down from the state and local officials, has been the letter of the law, locked up for 14 days. As it turns out, we were able to define, and I use the term, you cannot measure what you cannot define. I'm really big on that. So you cannot measure what you cannot define. So you define it first, and that's what I sought today. And through 2 state officials and sometimes conflicting views, but with the one that really mattered, we were able to talk through what a quarantine might look like for Chris when he went back on December 26th. And it involved no confinement into his room, the freedom of movement, as she affirmed that his freedom of movement, he has the right to do that. But the burden is on Home of Hope to maintain social distancing and everything else as required. But it's tailor-made according to each client's ability to understand, each client's ability to do the best they can to not infect others or not come around others. Of course, to date, everybody in quarantine has been healthy, and there's not been the risk. There's not been a case of COVID there. But anyway, every precaution is taken. So that was the first crack in the wall that I'd heard was this afternoon from that state official. And I said, would you please communicate that to Home of Hope, those practical applications there, define it for me. And then we will measure in 2 weeks when Chris returns. We'll sit down and we'll measure what happened. Now that we've defined it, we'll measure it. And so 2 weeks from now, we'll have a sit down and say, how did this go, what worked and what didn't. But the good news is we are going to pick up Chris tomorrow as planned for his birthday, and we'll have him over Christmas and return him on the 26th. Yes, he will have a 14-day quarantine, but it will be tailor-made. He will not be confined to his room. When he gets out of his room, no one's going to push his wheelchair back in there and insist that he stay there. He's going to have freedom of movement and everything else, which is the way it should be. You know, as I've said to numerous officials, you can say your cause is noble, but a noble cause, if done in an immoral way, is no longer noble. And that's what I sought to preserve, was Chris's constitutional and personal rights, that he had the freedom of movement, freedom of assembly, and that they would tailor make something according to his ability. So that was the first time any state official has said some practical means to accomplish that he won't be confined, etc. Everything I've heard from Home of Hope since, or before that, was confined to his room, eating everything else in his room for 14 days. No one offered any practical adaptation to that. So I'm very, very thrilled, thankful for that official in the state of Oklahoma, and then the phone calls that they put into it to just talk through these practical things here. So good news, Chris will be able to celebrate his birthday with Mom and me tomorrow, and have Christmas, just the three of us, and then we'll take him back on Saturday the 26th. So I wanted to give you the update. Thank you for your prayers. Thank you for your concern. Anybody who cares for somebody in a chronic or other situation, you know, an aging parent in a nursing home or an assisted living or something like that, or like in my case, what do they call it now? I'll just call it handicapped, because that's what we called it. Multiple handicap. You know, there's a continual burden there, and yet they're tremendous joy, and it's a burden of love. But I'll tell you, dealing sometimes with state regulations and such, it's frustrating, and it really is a matter of prayer. So thank you for being concerned. Thank you for your messages. Thank you for the emails and everything else. And I'll see you tomorrow. Actually, I'll be online or on this space a little earlier tomorrow, because I'm going to go get Chris at about 8 o'clock. So I'll actually be in a little earlier than normal on my normal Wednesday morning short teaching that I do. So thank you for your concerns. I'm glad we were able to make be better able to define what quarantine means for Chris. And my hope is that other parents and other guardians, or the children of maybe an aged parent or something like that, will be able to similarly press the facility where their loved one is for some sort of a practical plan that does not involve closing somebody up in their room for 14 days and limiting their movement and you know, just caging them in. So encourage you in that. Thank you so much. God bless. Bye-bye.